Welcome to the Rimworld mod rundown. We'll be taking a quick look at what you can expect to see from Dub's Bad Hygiene. For starters, you'll need the additional workshop content, Harmony. Time to cover one of the OG mods, released all the way back in 2017 and still being used to this day. Dub's Bad Hygiene comes in a couple of versions, Standard and Light. We'll be using the Standard version today, but just know that if this all starts to sound a little bit overwhelming to you, Light only contains mechanics related to toilets, bathing and the need for hygiene, as well as the mood effects surrounding that. If you go with the Standard approach, you also get to play with sewage management, central heating, water, irrigation, fertilizer, air conditioning, hot tubs and even a kitchen sink. So how do we approach covering this mod? I'm sure for some of you out there, hygiene is a completely foreign concept. Whilst Dubs will still work on a map that doesn't have an above ground water source, for the sake of visual clarity we're going to land on a river tile and progress through the tech tree one by one, so tribal research is going to be our starting point. We'll also be covering this with the settings that the mod has enabled as standard, and covering any potential options as and when they come up. First things first then, the new needs. All of your colonists are now going to have a need for bladder and hygiene. These needs aren't going to be present on visitors or raiders though, so it saves you the hassle of needing to build a row of portaloos that end up looking like the last day of Glastonbury Festival. The bladder need is pretty self-explanatory. It only has a single breakpoint which floats around 15% on the bar. When at or below this threshold, the colonist is going to have a -3 to mood because they need the bathroom. There's no mood buff for having this need fulfilled though, despite many people who can confirm one of the best feelings in the world is making it to the bathroom in time after a long drive home. Hygiene on the other hand has a few steps. At its highest level, above 90% or so, the colonist has a +6 mood buff for being squeaky clean. Above 70% but below 90, it drops to +3 and just becomes clean. Then between 10 and 70 there is neither a positive nor a negative effect, the colonist simply is. Below 10% hygiene the mood debuff kicks in, with a -3 for being grimy. If you continue to let the need fall at this point without addressing it, it leads to a more severe debuff of -6 for being filthy, which also triggers the health effect of having bad hygiene. This lowers social impact, because nobody wants to talk to a smelly bastard, and it also raises the chances of food poisoning thanks to handling food with their grubby mitts. To go with this new need for hygiene, you even have some accompanying traits. Germophobia makes your colonists wash the most frequently, hygienic is slightly more often, unhygienic lowers the frequency a little bit, and slob makes the colonist go full Asmongold. There are some new illnesses included with Dubs that make use of these needs and play off poor hygiene management too, such as diarrhea or dysentery. So now food poisoning isn't the only thing you need to worry about in terms of a colonist violently exploding their bodily fluids all around the base.
Feels like that time I had explosive diarrhea. Roundhouse.
So what can we build, as standard, to help deal with these new needs then? If you happen to land on a tile that has a river, lake or an ocean, your colonists will be smart enough to go and wash themselves in these water sources when they get dirty. But it isn't always an option, nor is it always going to be super accessible if they're having to travel halfway across the map just to scrub up. This is where the primitive well comes in. It only needs 25 materials to build, and when selected, it shows an overlay of all available water sources. You want to select a spot that's as densely surrounded as possible while still being accessible to your colony. You'll see pretty clearly when placing these that natural water sources have the most opaque overlay, and it'll also show the direction of water current. If you select this well once it's been built, you'll also see that pollution level is a consideration for your water. So as much as I love waster colonies and using tox generators, it turns out that converting your local water source into something that resembles monster energy is a bad idea. Your bath shouldn't be fizzy. Now, whilst the well draws water, colonists can't directly consume water from it. You need to set up a few tubs first. These tubs are super cheap at just 15 materials. Water drawn from the well is dumped into these tubs, and they can then be used for washing as needed. Tasks like this are split between basic tasks and hauling tasks, so if you're using Dub's Bad Hygiene, that dedicated hauler and cleaner actually becomes a lot more useful, giving you more of a reason to recruit someone even if they're completely incapable of performing skilled work.
We import 2/3 of our cheese. That is a disgrace.
If you set up the tub, you'll see that it comes with a fair amount of options. The majority of these come down to how you would like to set up your colony. Do you want a communal washroom, individual bathrooms, shared guest bathrooms but individual colonist setups? Do you separate them by gender or go for a unisex approach? You can even link them to an individual bed that provides ownership to a select colonist and stops others wandering into each other's bedrooms to wash their balls at 3 AM. You'll also notice that whilst the water in the tub is fresh, it is untreated, which is going to run a small risk of disease when used. This risk will still be there at natural sources too, so you can't avoid it by just scrubbing in the nearby river. These tubs will eventually need refilling as the water is used over time, but if you set up a communal shower early on and have these left unroofed, you can save yourself a bit of work as the rainfall will naturally do it for you. This is what the stall door in the hygiene menu is useful for. It costs just 5 materials to build, and it doesn't divide rooms like a standard door, but it does provide privacy from one side to the other, meaning a colonist can wash without Jeff, the creepy breather, finding an excuse to walk through the shower stalls and try and sneak a peek. What you're more likely to need these stall doors for is setting up your toilets. Whilst you can go straight into building individual bathrooms if you want, for a tribal start especially, it's typically a lot easier to set up a communal shitter. You want this building away from your fresh water for pretty obvious reasons. At this stage of the game, it's going to be a manual job to empty them, so find your least favourite colonist and make sure they're the only one with this enabled in their work priorities. These early latrines cost 15 materials to build, and whilst they say they use 14 litres per use, for now we're going to ignore that. That will come in later when they're actually plumbed in. Be really careful about placing these in colonist bedrooms early on, as whilst a private toilet may seem better, they have massive penalties to beauty and room cleanliness. If you try tending someone's wounds in their bedroom with one of these right next to them, the chance for infection is going to be sky high. So we all know how toilets work, and what happens when you have to manually empty one of these bad boys? Yep, just as you'd expect. The resource of fecal sludge is generated. You really don't want to keep this around your actual storage in your colony, much in the same way that you wouldn't want to live in a house full of barrels full of your own leavings. You've got a few options for how to deal with this, depending entirely on how ecologically sound you're feeling. These barrels won't naturally decay, and at the minute anyway, you can't just dump them into the nearest river or sea like all of the UK water companies do. You can kick the barrels over, especially underhanded when done in a kill corridor if you want to make raiders walk through a biological war crime. Just be aware that being downed into this raw sewage with open wounds is going to cause some biblical scale infections. If you want to reconsider your crappy approach to combat, you can always designate the area to be scooped back into barrels by using the remove sewage designation. Your other option at this point is building a burn pit. This takes 20 steel and you'll want to throw it somewhere out of the way. The air pollution that it kicks out doesn't exactly do wonders for your colonist's health, unless you want to simulate living in London. This burn pit will work as long as it's provided with fecal sludge. Whilst it's burning, you can then use it to dispose of corpses, drugs or gear as you see fit, making for quite a cost-effective way of clearing dead raiders from your tile, by burning them in a pile of your colonist turds. The last bits you'll have at this stage are the litter box for small animals around your colony, but by default, animals won't have a bladder need. This is only going to be required if you enable that in the mod options. If you're running a large colony with a lot of animals, as you might imagine, things get pretty messy very quickly. If you're mad enough to turn this on for wild animals too, it won't be long before your map is a crap-stained disaster, especially in biomes that have rampant wildlife. Finally, there's also the bath mat, made using 20 fabric or wool. This helps to mitigate the dirt that's created by using a tub, so you want it placed in the interaction spot that a colonist typically stands when washing, rather than directly underneath it. So it's time to start moving into the tech and see what else is included in the... I see why people were asking me to cover this mod now.
Oh, you can stay, but I'm leaving.
Yellow if they're using late season apples. And of course in Canada the whole thing's flip-flop.
Not only are we going to be dealing with all of these new projects that come in with dubs, we're also going to be dealing with the inclusions that are tucked away in base game research. So let's go digging for those first and then go project by project in dubs. In smithing, you'll find the Mosaic tile. This is peak for bathroom or kitchen aesthetic. It takes 4 steel per tile and provides 1 beauty. So it's cheaper than a standard steel tile, but it sacrifices that cleanliness buff in favour of making rooms pretty instead. With electricity, you unlock the 1x1 and 2x2 ceiling fan. Both of these sizes use exactly the same amount of materials to build and have the same power consumption. So the size you use is entirely down to what fits the room best. These fans combine both an electric light and temperature regulation similar to a passive cooler. Not only that, they're built on an extremely unique layer, saving a little bit of floor space if you don't already subscribe to wall light superiority. If you build a biofuel refinery, you're also going to find the option to turn your fecal sludge into Chemfuel, if you'd rather have it become the world's stinkiest biodiesel. So there's not too much to worry about there. Let's open up the real page and get into the meat of this mod. Now, I get it, this is not only quite an expansive tech tree, but it's also a mod that has a lot of its own prerequisite fallback. For example, if we check heating, you'll see that it also pairs with plumbing for another part. Same with saunas if you have electricity. This is going to make for a bit of bouncing around, but I'll try my best to cover this stuff in an order that hopefully makes sense. Pens at the ready then, the exam starts now. For the sake of this video, we are still thinking of dubs as if you started tribal. So first off, we are going to grab heating. At this stage, it simply unlocks the log boiler. And if you're a connoisseur of licking windows, no, this building doesn't boil logs. This boiler takes 200 steel to build, and with the tech we currently have, simply heats up the room that it's built within by burning wood. Now we start to get a look into some of the language that dubs uses when we build this though. It produces 2,000 heating units for radiators and hot water tanks. So just keep in mind that we have 14 litres per use on the crappers, which is relating to water consumption, and heating units that we'll also be working with. And whilst this does say that it heats adjacent baths, the tub full of water that we're using to scrub ourselves is most definitely not a bath. So don't worry about placing these next to your wash station just yet. Next then is Sewage Sludge Composting, which unlocks the Biosolids composter. Now, given that you have other options for disposing of bodies, drugs and gear, like campfires or crematoriums, this is a far more beneficial way of removing that lovely fecal sludge that your colonists are generating. Each composter costs 45 steel to make and holds up to 250 litres of poop, with each unit of sludge counting as 1 litre. This composting process takes around 5 days to complete, within the ideal temperature range of between 19 and 60 degrees. That means if you're living in a somewhat unpredictable biome, you might want a small shed for these with a heat source to keep them warm and working. It won't ruin the process if they're outside of that temperature, it just makes it take significantly longer. When finished, this process creates biosolids at a 1:1 ratio. These biosolids can be used 10 at a time to increase the fertility of a tile for 1 year, with it raising fertility percentage by 10% relative to what it was to begin with. For example, stony soil would normally be 70%. It becomes 77% with this. Standard soil goes up from 100 to 110%. Fertile soil is going to get the best bonus, going from 140 to 154%. Remember, as well as this fertility rate, all plants have their own fertility requirements and fertility sensitivity. So if you really want to get the best out of this high quality soil, grow plants like rice, corn, heel root, smoke leaf, something that gets you the full bonus. This fertilizer can be placed by simply dragging desired areas from the hygiene section of the architect menu. You just want to remember that if you're going to make use of this, you'll need to build additional composters as your colony grows. The last thing you want is overflowing toilets when you could be spreading it over the soil that you're growing your food in. Now's time for one of the first big projects you're going to unlock. Plumbing grants you access to everything you're going to need to start moving water around your colony without the need for manual hauling. If it's your first time using dubs, it's not a bad idea to pause the game when this project completes and take a little bit of time looking around your map to figure out a rough blueprint, as whilst plumbing isn't necessarily expensive to throw down, it can be one of the more annoying projects to rebuild if you mess up your early placement. Let's go through the chain of buildings that this unlocks then. It's really not that different to using power lines with generators and batteries. You just have one or two more stops along the way with a green tin rather than a blue. Treat plumbing pipes like your conduits. They just need to be placed right up to a building that you want to be incorporated into your plumbing system. You've got a valve that works like a power switch, so if you want to control the flow of water to a certain part rather than having it permanently on, you can do so. The water well is your generator, with its placement determining the capacity of the system. These only cost 50 steel to build, and just like your primitive well, they are impacted by pollution, so you want a nice, clean body of water when placing them, trying to fit as much as possible into that area around them. As a super rough general rule, hitting 2,700 litres per day when placed on soil is about as good as you're going to get. Anything above 2,500 is absolutely fine. If you have a lake or a large river on your map, you can place it over it instead by building a bridge, with a single well potentially reaching up to 3,860 litres. As you would expect, these wells are draining the water from the source below them, at least if they're placed over soil anyway. This means at some point you might need to build a new well as the old one's depleted, but there's a solution for that down the line. For now, let's just get the well working. This isn't going to start pumping water by itself, so you're going to need to build a wind pump. This costs 25 steel and an additional 80 wood, stone or metal to build. Just like placing a normal wind generator, this is going to need clearance in the front and behind it to work at the highest output, with each individual wind pump providing enough draw to extract 3,000 litres per day, providing it's working at peak efficiency. So if we assume you placed a single well over a pretty reasonable source, a single pump will easily handle that demand, whilst it's windy. Now we just need to hook up a tank or two, otherwise this water isn't actually going anywhere. You've got a couple of options here. The water butt is the smaller of the two. It takes 25 wood, stone or metal. This can be moved as needed and colonists can take off the lid and wash directly from the water that's stored within it. They only hold up to 100 litres though. The water tower is fixed in place and it only stores water. It takes 25 steel and a further 50 wood, stone or metal. But for that little bit more investment, you're getting 8,000 litres of capacity. Now, it does need to be said that a contaminated water container is less punishing to dump out if it's only holding 100 litres, but you're going to need to build a lot of water butts to make up for the capacity of even a single water tower. That's the hard part done anyway, which was getting the water. Now we just need to plumb some things in so we can actually use it.
We can definitely do plumbing, it's not an issue. Trojan's very capable after his sleep. Plumbing's just fucking Lego, isn't it? Water Lego.
For the sake of this video, I'm going to leave pipes visible when placed, but there is a toggle in the options menu that makes pipes always hidden, and only crazy people don't use that. The water we're currently drawing is pretty damn cold, and whilst we could hook up some bathtubs and basins for washing, let's first set up a hot water tank which we have unlocked thanks to previously completing heating research. This is another thing you might want a dedicated room for, a boiler room basically. We know that the log boiler created 2,000 units of heat, and each of these hot water tanks uses 100 units to heat, so even a single boiler can do quite a lot of lifting. These tanks are going to cost you 75 steel each though, so don't go too trigger happy placing them down just yet. Now that we've got a hot water tank, heat and water, let's put some basins in our bathroom. These are nice and easy to throw down, they cost only 5 steel and 10 more metal, wood or stone. They allow a colonist to quickly wash their hands after going to the bathroom and will help slow the decay of the hygiene need. Of course, you can't stay clean forever by just washing your hands, so let's replace the washing tubs in people's rooms with an actual bath. Bathtubs cost 5 steel and 30 metal, wood or stone, so a little bit more expensive than a basin, but not by a great deal. They also count as a source of recreation, allowing you to fulfill 2 need bars with a single interaction. and whilst you can have a bath without installing the log boiler and a hot water tank, colonists take a -3 mood debuff for bathing in cold water. Equally, you could build a log boiler next to every single bathtub and heat the water directly, but that's pretty expensive to maintain, and it's only really needed in a very cold climate where the boiler's also keeping the room toasty warm. Each bath is going to consume 190 litres of water from your storage per use, making those water butts even less appealing as a storage solution, as it'd take 2 of them to fill a single bath. As to where the water goes once the bath is finished,
I don't know.
the last part you'll have unlocked here is the sewage outlet. It costs just 50 wood, stone or metal and allows you to dump sewage wherever you'd like. In rivers, in the sea, at the entrance to the local bug nest, whatever floats your boat. Just be aware that if you dump your sewage near to trees, into a body of water, or leave it unroofed to be hit by rainfall, it's going to greatly increase how quickly it will clear over time. This is likely going to be something that you will want to add a plumbing valve to, allowing you to enable or disable this outlet as needed. But if you leave the valve open and hook up the outlet to the toilets, poop is no longer being stored in the latrine. Instead, it's being dumped out wherever you chose. This is why you might want that valve. If you're going to be making good use of fertilizer, you need that sludge to make biosolids. Then if your composters are full or if the fields are totally saturated, you can flip the handle and remove the need to manually empty the toilets. Just be aware that now each use of the crapper is consuming 14 litres of water. A quick note as well on these pipes. Dubs is a little bit mechanics heavy, sure, but it's not sadistic. You can have the same pipe network feeding your water from the pump to the towers to the boiler to baths and basins, and carrying the waste from toilets to the sewage outlet. If you wanted to do separate networks of water for clean and dirty, there's nothing stopping you, but you don't need to overthink it if you just want hot baths and clean toilets. The only thing you want to make sure that you're doing is dumping any sewage either away from or downriver from your water collection point. Colonists tend not to appreciate when they turn the tap on and get chunky brown water.
Oh, this coffee smells like shit.
It is shit, Austin.
Oh good, then it's not just me.
On to something considerably less gross then. Saunas. Bonus points if you're using another mod that gives you rustic looking log walls to build the room with. These parts all go under recreation and count as a hydrotherapy source. At minimum, you're going to need a fueled sauna heater and some sauna seating. But if you have electricity researched, you can skip the need to fuel the heater and just power it directly instead. The fuel version of the heater takes 200 stone to build, but can seemingly be made from steel as well. This aims to heat the room that it's placed within to a nice, sweaty 60 degrees C. As well as being a solid source of recreation gain, regular use of a sauna also reduces the colonist's risk of experiencing a heart attack. So if you're running a geriatric colony full of coffin dodgers, it can be very beneficial to help keep them on their feet. You're of course going to need some seating in this room too, with the wooden looking the best aesthetically, but it can be made from metal, wood or stone. So if you want to burn your ass sitting on a 60-degree piece of metal, be my guest. Just bear in mind that this room will only reach the intended temperature whilst in use. The heater doesn't burn continuously, so fuel-wise it's actually very efficient. If you did want to use an electric heater instead though, that takes one component, 20 steel and a further 180 metal or stone of your choice. This heats the room to exactly the same temperature when in use and consumes a massive 1000 watts of power to do so. So unless you're floating a lot of excess power, you're probably going to need some batteries around the base. One of those rare cases where I would actually go for the fueled version almost every time. The only tricky part comes if you're living in a biome that's almost devoid of trees. A nice straightforward room to build though, with no need to actually hook this up to your water network either. After all, it's a sauna, not a steam room.
We don't want your lukewarm milk, Liam.
And start breaking bricks, wet nips. Or else, you know what I mean?
Now's the time for another big project, central heating. You're going to need heating, plumbing, and electricity research to get your hands on this, so it gives you a rough idea of what installing central heating is going to involve. Let's start with the new boiler options then. If you're currently using the log boiler to heat your water, these all fulfill the same role, just with a different method of consumption. The gas boiler and electric boiler both cost 3 components and 80 steel, with the gas one consuming Chemfuel to power it and the electric using 250 watts. Now, both of these can be controlled by thermostats, but we're going to get into that in a bit. Just be aware that log boilers and solar heaters do not have that functionality. The gas boiler will kick out the same amount of heating units as your log boiler did, so it's a nice easy replacement provided you have access to a reliable source of Chemfuel, such as biofuel refining sewage into it or ranching a few boomalopes. The electric boiler on the other hand is variable and needs to be hooked up to your standard power grid. There are 8 power mode settings with this boiler, going up in 250 watt increments to hit a cap of 2K. These convert the watts directly into heating units, so given the amount of other mods you might be using and the approaches that you can take to heating or cooling your base, there's a ridiculous amount of possibilities as to how power efficient this will or won't be on a base by base basis. That was fun to say. You can go the route of solar heaters if you'd rather be more renewable in your approach to heating, with this having a fairly obvious downside that you need to mitigate. These cost 75 steel each, and at peak efficiency they generate 2000 units of heat, but they'll only be heating your hot water tanks while the sun's out, so when it's dark the stored water temperature is going to slowly drop. Each use of a bath or a sink is going to drain a fair chunk more. This means you need to lean more heavily into building multiple hot water tanks that provides adequate access to hot water overnight, and that way you won't be burning wood, Chemfuel or power for your access to hot water. As long as your colony doesn't lean too heavily towards having night owls, it honestly isn't that hard to set up. Of course, it does use more floor space than throwing down a boiler, but every option here has a fairly solid use case, depending on what you have a good excess of: wood, Chemfuel, power, or space.
I'm in space.
I know you are, mate. Yeah, we're both in space. Anyway.
What do we do with this thermostat then? You want to put it in the coldest room of your base that should be warm. Think a corridor or the entrance to your airlock if you're using one. A thermostat will control all connected heat sources on the same pipe network. So, if in this example, it notices that the hallway is below the desired temperature of 21 degrees, it kicks in and turns on all of the radiators that are connected to it, warming up the entire base in the process. When the temperature tolerance is met, everything turns off again whilst it still retains the heat for a few more hours. It's basically there to stop your radiators constantly consuming the heating units that they require, allowing you to go above capacity on the network. In theory, anyway. This does mean that a base using a thermostat works best when it's built in a compound style, with all rooms interconnected via a continuous corridor, things like a mountain base. Scattered individual rooms are likely to work better without thermostats, as the rooms will vary a lot more based on size and how often the doors are being opened and closed to the elements. Now you're going to want to hook up some of these radiators to the piping network. You have 3 options here: standard, large, or tower rail. The normal radiator and tower rail are near identical. Both cost 15 steel and a further 10 metal or stone of your choice, with the tower rail offering an additional 6 beauty, because towels? Just like a hot water tank, these use 100 units of heat, so a single log boiler could support 20 of these by itself. If you wanted to go the route of solar, just be aware that these radiators will drop their temperature much faster than a hot water tank does. They aren't insulated, they are made to disperse the heat that they hold. So if you're living in a cold biome, it's best to lean on the other boilers so your base doesn't become an icebox every evening. Radiators can be a little bit slower at heating up the room that they are placed in, but they're not exactly a slouch. Just be aware that whilst they can be extremely efficient in terms of power usage, they suffer more severely when it comes to recovering from power cuts or cold snaps compared to a standard electric heater. Then you've got the large radiator, which will do a better job at keeping things like workshops, labs, hospitals, dining rooms, or your rec room warm. Whilst the standard radiator will do fine for a bedroom, it's going to be fighting an uphill battle in anything bigger than a 7x7. You're paying more to build this, with it taking 15 steel and 60 more metal or stone, and whilst it does hold 3 times the amount of heating units, it doesn't mean it takes 3 times longer to drain. It drops its temperature just as fast as a standard radiator or a towel rail. This won't hold a room overnight if you're using solar. It just warms up a little bit faster the next day when the sun comes out.
Wow, hey, look you guys, the sun's rising!
Let's hop over to the next research in this chain then. Geothermal heating. As you would expect, this gets you the geothermal heater, costing 4 components and 240 steel. Now, I know that I'm a little bit overly precious with geothermal vents on my map, but I also know that logistically when you compare this to an electric boiler, it is more efficient, with a geothermal heater producing 3,700 units of heating. Given that a geothermal power generator would make 3,600 watts, that's 100 more heating units if you use the geothermal heater. That doesn't mean I find it any easier to justify capping off one of the extremely limited geothermal vents with this building, given how many alternate methods you have of generating heating units. But if you want the most consistent source of those heating units with basically zero upkeep, this building is unmatched. You just really need to be in a biome that requires that amount of heating to survive. I'm talking tundra maps that border an ice sheet level of cold. Onto something else that everybody is going to find a use for though, septic tanks. If you built a valve in your pipe network to keep the poop in your toilets for use in fertilizer, now's the time for an upgrade. No more playing the world's most smelly version of hook-a-duck directly in your crappers. A septic tank is going to hold up to 500 litres of waste and it can treat 50 litres a day, with it costing 100 steel and a further 100 metal, wood or stone to build. These structures are not only a big hit to beauty, but they are absolutely horrific for cleanliness. You want to build this well away from your base or hide it in a room that you never use if possible. You've got a couple of options when utilising these tanks though. You can decide if you do or don't want to drain them. Draining it means you're going to yank the sludge out for use in composters or biofuel refineries, with the drain level setting how full in a percentage you want the tank to hit before somebody draws the short straw and opens the lid for the world's worst juice box. Given that each flush of a toilet is going to add 14 litres of waste into this, it will not take long for even a moderately sized colony to fill a septic tank. If you've got it set not to drain, any overflow is going to continue down any connected pipes and use your sewage outlets instead. Basically, this slows the dumping of raw sewage if you don't want to make use of it. You can also stack multiple septic tanks which will spread the waste across all of them equally, giving them a greater chance at treating it before it hits capacity and discharges directly onto your tile.
That looks good.
From septic tank research, then you have sewage treatment. And these are more expensive at 400 steel and 8 components each, and they also require power to function, taking a fairly substantial 500 watts. They're still just as ugly and unclean as a septic tank though, so once again, either build them away from your base or keep it in a small smelly room. Whilst the septic tank was only a 2x2 building, these are 5x5. For that extra space, they are working 10 times as efficiently as a single septic tank, treating 500 litres of waste per day, and they have the capacity to hold 10,000 litres. You're also going to know when this thing is nearing its capacity as the water that it stirs becomes significantly less appealing, like the world's worst matcha coffee. Although standard matcha coffee probably isn't that much better in all honesty. This works in exactly the same way with its drain toggle and percentage setting, so if you do want to make sure that this building never spills over, you can have colonists bucket out the slop when it gets a little bit too full and go and make use of it elsewhere. Now, I'm really hoping we can move on to a section that's significantly less gross to talk about, because someone out there sat down to watch this video with a snack, and they are seriously regretting that decision right now. A Snickers bar was a really bad choice, right? Oh, thank God. Next up, we've got modern bathroom fixtures. At this point, you're getting a shower, simple shower, toilet, fountain, and a kitchen sink. Why the divide is there between what's unlocked with plumbing is beyond me, because you need plumbing to unlock this tech to begin with. Let's start with the showers. They both work exactly the same. They consume 65 litres of water per use, offer the same amount of beauty and comfort, with the simple shower only needing 15 steel and a standard shower taking 5 steel and then 20 metal, wood or stone. Aesthetically speaking, the simple shower looks better with a communal approach, like something you'd find in a gym locker room, whereas the normal shower is more suited towards a private bathroom. Weirdly, the flammability is higher on the simple shower, despite it being made out of steel and capable of dispensing water with a turn of a handle. Still, there are weirder things in Rimworld, I guess. The toilet addresses the beauty and cleanliness issues of the latrines. It takes 5 steel and 15 metal, wood or stone to build. These still use the same amount of water per flush, but they generally keep colonists a lot happier, with a beauty bonus instead of a debuff, no cleanliness penalty to speak of, and even a small amount of comfort. These toilets, however, don't have a pit, meaning you have to plumb them in, which by this point is something you're really likely going to be doing anyway. The kitchen sink takes 15 steel and 35 metal, wood or stone to build. Whilst colonists can use it to wash their hands as needed, the best part of it is the 5 additional cleanliness and the beauty buff that it provides to the room it's built in. This helps to offset the food poisoning risk of any meals created in that room. So whilst a mod like Common Sense does its best to keep the cooking area clean by having your chef sweep up before they start any cooking bills, other colonists may always wander through the room and track dirt and grime across it. This sink gives you a little bit more wiggle room when idiots do their thing and walk across your kitchen floor after a hard day's work in the fertilised fields. Then you've got the water fountain. This takes just 5 steel and 10 metal, wood or stone. It can be used for washing and drinking, but so far drinking hasn't been something that we needed to do. So let's address that and dig into some of the mod options real quick. You'll see you have an option for a thirst need, survival mode and pet thirst. By default, this thirst need is off, and it can be a little bit tricky to manage early on, but it adds an extra layer of survival to the game if you're finding that vanilla needs are a little too easy to stay on top of. Survival mode pushes this even further, by lowering the generation of shallow water, which is what your wells draw from, as well as making terrain features no longer count, considering how dangerous it could potentially be to drink straight from a river or a pond. Then if you want this need for your animals too, you can turn on pet thirst as well. For now, we are just going to activate the need for thirst and restart the game, as the setting can't just be flicked on and off whenever you feel like it. If we open the colonist need bars now, it's starting to look really busy. Fortunately, water isn't that tricky to take care of, as in the early game you're able to drink directly from one of the filled water tubs. Later, you can use sinks, fountains or even the water butts if you need to. As well as being able to drink directly from these water sources, colonists will also bottle a small amount and keep it in their inventory, as dictated by the mod options. So whilst this isn't a difficult need to manage on your own tile, it does make for far more realistic travel across the world map. You need to ensure that you're taking enough bottles with you to survive the trip there and back, as dehydration will kick in when this need reaches 0%. It lowers consciousness and increases the amount that a colonist needs to eat, via hunger rate offset. These debuffs gain severity as the dehydration worsens, eventually reaching a max level that caps consciousness at 10%, similar to collapsing from malnutrition. Once a colonist has a drink, the condition begins to slowly reverse, but it certainly isn't instant. Unfortunately, you can't Bear Grylls this either. You actually need water to fulfill the need.
I'm getting low on water, and the only thing I can do is to drink my own pee.
We're going to leave the thirst need enabled for now and continue going on through the research tree. We could look at electric pumps, but that leads us to the next big chunk of projects, so let's hop over it and grab irrigation. Again, this is another project that also has related settings in the mod options, so we'll look at those first. On the extra features tab, you'll see that there is a checkbox for rain irrigation. Now, this is quite intensive on your tick rate, meaning the game will run a fair bit slower when there's any kind of rainfall, as all viable plants on the map are then having to check against this effect. Not such an issue if you live on a tundra or in the desert, but it's going to be horrific in a swamp or a forest biome. Whilst we're here, you can also see this mod menu covers sliders for basically everything. Irrigation strength, fertilizer strength, base fertility, fertilizer lifespan, not to mention the myriad of sliders on the main features page. If anything feels a little bit over or underpowered during your time with dubs, you can always tweak it in here if you need to. With that in mind, there are two settings here that you'll need to be on the main menu to change: hydroponics and passive coolers. By default, neither of these buildings use water in base game, but realistically the passive cooler is working by evaporation, and hydroponics, given the name, use water instead of soil to better infuse plants with nutrition and accelerate the growth rate. If at this point you've got a good handle on water extraction and how plumbing works, you can tick both of these settings to alter how the buildings function. Passive coolers no longer use wood as fuel, instead they need to be filled with water, and your hydroponics basins will die out from a lack of water instead of a lack of power, but the water tanks they use only function if there's power present, so solar flares are still a danger to your crops. Anyway, back on topic, it just felt relevant given that we're about to install irrigation that boosts plant growth rate. If you want to go the route of sprinklers rather than hydroponics, you need to do a little bit of planning in terms of your layout to make sure that you're getting the best possible coverage when you turn your sprinklers on. Although if you want to immediately drive a YouTube audience crazy, just throw them down wherever you want, overlap them, leave small gaps, the comments section is bound to be completely civil about it. These sprinklers are really cheap, at just 15 steel and 1 component each. They're also small enough that a crop can still be planted underneath it, so you aren't giving up a tile of grow zone by placing these either. The main consideration comes in with the radius that you want these things set to, as at their highest reach, which is a 13 by 13 circle, or as close as you can get to a circle in Rimworld, each one of these drinks 1,000 litres of water every morning to provide the fertility boost, which by default is 180%, working how the fertilizer did. So if you have these over fertile soil that's also fertilized, it pushes it up to a massive 277%. This fertility bonus will then slowly fall away over the course of the day, so that huge bonus is only active for a few hours before the soil returns to a more sensible number, but that's easily enough to keep most plants above a 200% growth rate for their entire lifespan, especially when paired with the right soil or fertilizer. If you'd rather work in less odd shapes when placing these, you can lower the radius of the sprinklers so they consume less water when activated and line up in a more uniform manner across your crops. Just be aware that you're going to be paying for this consistency in additional steel and components, so you need to weigh up if you've got an excess of materials or water to throw at this problem. Sprinklers are also very specifically looking to improve ground fertility. Having a handful of these near your hydroponics isn't going to do anything. Those plants are already in water, which is accelerating their growth. From irrigation, you then get fire suppression. These, just like your irrigation sprinklers, cost only 1 component and 15 steel. If the local temperature gets too high or if there's any nearby fire, these activate and try and douse the threat. These are really easy to throw around the colony and they don't require rearming like a fire foam popper does. Just be aware that each activation of a fire sprinkler drinks about 200 litres of water when set at the largest radius. So if you're saturating these near your pillboxes or barricades to try and keep your colonists from being affected by incendiaries, when you turn in for the night after a successful defense, there might not be that much water left in the tanks.
Do not, my friends, become addicted to water. It will take hold of you, and you will resent its absence.
On to swimming pools then. Pretty self-explanatory here. This is a solid source of hydrotherapy recreation, but you're not getting the same health benefits as using a sauna, unfortunately. Of course, the swimming pool doesn't require an entire room to be built to work, with it taking 450 metal, wood or stone. This is one of the few buildings in Dubs that does have a construction skill requirement too, taking at least 5 to create. You'll be getting a big old chunk of beauty from this pool, and it also provides comfort whilst used, about equal to sitting on a good quality stool when using a chess table in terms of the double dip need gain. Now, this pool does take quite a considerable amount of water to fill, with it also requiring a flow of at least 50 litres an hour to maintain. So this thing at minimum is chewing through 1,200 litres of water a day, a little under half of a smartly placed water well. It also takes 36,000 litres of water to fill, which at the lowest fill rate is gonna take about 30 days. Yeah. You'll be happy to hear that this does fill a little bit faster if you leave it open to the elements whilst it's raining. However, colonists refuse to get in the pool whilst it's raining because they don't want to get wet. So if you want to have the best chance at filling this and using it within a reasonable time frame, build a surrounding poolside area but keep the room unroofed until it contains an acceptable level of water. Then slap a roof on that bitch and you can use it come rain or shine. Before we make that big jump in tech then, let's cover multi-split air conditioning. You're going to need the standard air conditioning tech unlocked first to use this, and it's a little bit more involved than just slapping down a vanilla cooler and setting the temperature. These indoor and walk-in freezer units both use a resource of cooling units, which are provided by connecting them to an outdoor unit via aircon pipes. This system is also going to require power, although the drain from the freezer and the indoor unit is significantly lower than the outdoor unit, and overall it consumes less than placing a vanilla cooler. This just takes a bit more work.
I'm done.
No, you're not. You're not done. You're not leaving. Because if you leave, you get nothing. You understand me? Nothing!
We'll start with the production of cooling then, by throwing down an outdoor unit. This takes 90 steel and 3 components to build and consumes a variable amount of power, with 200 watts of power converting into 100 units of cooling. A single outdoor unit is capable of hitting a maximum of 1,000 units generated. Now, just because it can use that much power doesn't mean you want this thing running at max constantly. It'll drink as much power as you tell it, even if it's overproducing cooling units in terms of what's currently being consumed. So you want to adjust this setting to match what is actually built around your base. We'll start by placing down the standard indoor units. These aim to hit 21 degrees by default, the usual comfortable temperature setting. They take 25 steel to build and can go all the way down to a nippy 5 degrees. They're another building that seems to operate on their own kind of unique layer, as you can place a wall light, an aircon unit and something like a chair on the same tile. It just looks a little janky. These will need hooking up to power as well as your outdoor unit, with each one of these just taking 25 watts, but 100 units of cooling to work. So a single maxed outdoor unit will just support 10 of these at full efficiency, but that doesn't matter if they're aiming to hold a comfortable ambient temperature or push it way down to 5. They're always going to consume as many cooling units as they state. All that's left to do after that is pipe everything up. You'll see that your aircon uses a darker blue colour when placing down tiles to show the connections. Just like plumbing, these pipes need to be right up to the structures that are using it too. They don't have wires coming off them like conduits do. Unlike radiators, aircon will not continue to work for a few hours after it's lost its source. So if you find that your outdoor unit's been destroyed, perhaps a drop pod raid or an unfortunate lightning strike, the coolers will immediately stop working. The outdoor unit also suffers an efficiency loss penalty when outdoor temperatures start rising, as it's overheating due to the strain. This is why you probably don't want to cap out a single outdoor unit at 1,000 cooling units of production by default, because as soon as this overheating becomes an issue, it has nothing more to give. It's better to have 2 outdoor units at 500 each. That way you can start adding in a little bit more as it's needed to deal with any stress placed on them by ambient temperature, keeping all indoor units then working as intended. The thing you probably want from this tech the most though is the walk-in freezer, as unlike a base game cooler, this does not need an exhaust port placed directly behind it. No more need to build a chimney or to add a vulnerable spot to your freezer. This walk-in version takes 30 steel and 1 component to build. It consumes 3 times the amount of cooling units as a standard indoor cooler. However, it easily drops temperatures below freezing and keeps your produce from spoiling, with its lowest setting being -22, and its default temperature is -4, although I would always recommend keeping your freezer around -20 if possible. It gives you a little bit more wiggle in terms of how long the room can hold its temperature in the case of a power cut or a solar flare. A freezer at -4 will start to thaw almost immediately once someone opens the door even a single time. It's why having an airlock leading into your freezer can help negate some of the natural temperature leakage.
Will you close the fucking doors? Close that fucking door!
Okay then, time for electric pumps. If you're tired of the unpredictability of wind and want more consistent flow from your wells, each one of these pumps is going to provide a flat 1,500 litres of draw per day. So if you put your well down in a pretty nice spot, you'll need a couple of these to hit its max capacity. Or you could pair your electric pump alongside a wind pump and ensure that at least something is always being drawn. They're also small enough buildings that they can sit in the footprint of a wind pump and not block its airflow. Each one of these electric pumps is going to take 80 steel, one component, and use 250 watts of power. So if you hadn't already gathered by things like air conditioning and sewage treatment, Dubs gets pretty heavy in its electricity usage fairly fast. If you're like me and you get quite comfortable only ever using as much power as the geothermals on your map will generate, you'll find yourself a little bit starved with bad hygiene on, if you want to make good use of it anyway. It's also not quite as easy as using tox generators everywhere because of the pollution issue, so you'll find a much greater need to use renewables and batteries, or even fueled generators. It's nice to be given a goal to work towards though, because it means your base actually takes considerably more planning, time and investment to build properly, with the final product being much more visually interesting as a result. On to the projects that we've unlocked from electric pumps then. First up is power showers. These are going to be a little bit more expensive to build, but they come with considerable upsides. They cost one component, 10 steel, and a further 20 metal, wood or stone to build. They also require hooking up to power and water, but they don't need access to a hot water tank to avoid the cold bathing debuff. It also provides a lot more beauty, far more comfort, and increases the speed that a colonist can wash themselves. But that comes at 75 watts of power consumption and 35 litres more water than a standard shower. They are still less consumption heavy than a bath, of course. Just be aware that because colonists clean themselves so quickly in these showers, that high comfort rarely comes into play. They hop in and out in a matter of seconds, so it doesn't give it much of a chance to do its thing. Then you've got smart toilets. Again, these need power as well as plumbing to function. They take 75 watts each and cost one component and 35 metal, stone or wood to build. Compared to your normal toilets, they're more beautiful and far more comfortable, as well as being impossible to block and using less water per flush. Now, even though they're smart toilets, you're not getting all the bells and whistles, like water jets, light shows and a built-in toaster. They're good toilets, but they are still just a toilet. If you do want something really fancy, you're going to need to unlock hot tubs. This gets you the structure of the same name for hydrotherapy recreation, yet another source of it. It needs 500 watts of power to work and it requires plumbing in to fill, but it doesn't need a hot water tank in the system, nor does it produce any sewage. That's all managed by the structure itself. It takes 4 components, 20 steel and an additional 150 metal, wood or stone to build, with a minimum construction skill of 10. It's not exactly a simple thing to put together. For this you're getting 25 beauty, 1.8 comfort, which is bonkers, and 140% recreation power. Don't worry about how it looks when you first build it either, as on its initial use it's going to be filled from the connected water tanks, and after that it's good to go. This does have the functionality to be assigned to a bed, if you'd prefer for colonists to have a personal hot tub rather than sharing a single communal one. It does get a little bit awkward if you decide to put this in your rec room and have colonists casually stripping off to dunk their plums in the collective genital soup. Next is industrial scale pumps. These are your endgame plumbing storage and pumping solutions, which isn't to say they're particularly advanced tech, they do only sit at industrial, but it's as good as it's going to get. The huge water tower is a... huge water tower? Jesus, who wrote this script? Me? Oh, alright. Taking 200 steel and just one component, it holds up to 50,000 litres of water. Given that you could have spent 75 steel on a standard tower that only holds 8,000, it's a pretty major jump. Just be aware that, again, if this source of water gets contaminated, it's a hell of a lot to throw away, and it's going to likely take a considerable amount of time to refill. The pumping station is a straight upgrade to your electric pump that was the prerequisite for this tech. It uses 4 times the amount of power and it costs slightly more at 120 steel and 3 components. But it's also capable of pumping 10,000 litres a day by itself compared to the 1,500 litres from the old electric pump. Given that 4 electric pumps would cost more in materials and provide less water capacity at an equal level of power consumption to the pumping station, it makes it pretty clear what the best option is. But if you're keeping plumbing systems on their own individual pipelines, this thing is likely mad overkill for a single well. On to deep water wells, and now we're getting interesting. If you spent a lot of your time on your map and started to run some of your water sources a little bit dry, this will let you reach new, deeper pools of water. Not only that, deep water is far enough down that it's unaffected by pollution. So if you're playing a colony that uses tox generators, you don't need to sweat it, making your drinking water taste like licking a 9-volt battery. These deep water deposits are different to standard ones. They spawn in entirely different locations or layouts. It's not quite as simple as them appearing where the groundwater is most dense. The deep water well is cheap enough to build at just 100 steel, but it's pretty beastly in terms of the work it takes to build it. Once up and running, if you've placed it in an ideal location, it draws roughly 8,300 litres a day. Of course, this is going to vary based map to map and how your water happened to generate, but anything over 6,000 is normally making pretty good use of this building. Now that we've got so much spare water to use, let's grab washing machines and clean our colonists' clothes for the first time in, wow, literal years. Each washing machine is quite power hungry, taking 420 watts of juice to blaze through the dirt and grime. It also needs 2 components and 100 steel to build, and without wanting to question exactly how, these buildings offer 100% solitary recreation game power. I assume people are pondering philosophy while sitting on top of it during a high spin cycle. Weirdly, this washing machine doesn't need hooking up to your plumbing network though, it only needs power, with each machine then capable of holding up to 5 pieces of clothing at once. This can only be loaded with tainted gear, but it will remove the taint from it, allowing you to very quickly acquire full suits of armour for your colony, or fill your storeroom with a huge amount of clothing that you can trade at full value. Of all things that this mod contains, this is probably the only thing I'd say that I'm not 100% sold on the balance of. But, being completely fair about that, I play with mods that allow me to mend and recycle my gear. This really isn't that different from doing that, and having to invest so far into the research tree to unlock it, swings and roundabouts I guess. It's not like people are power gaming the system by rushing washing machine research. There's far more disruptive mods out there. There's not much left to cover now. Water filtration is understandably quite deep in the tree though. A single water treatment building is all you're ever going to need too. It costs 250 steel, 5 components, and it consumes 800 watts of power. This single building will filter and clean all water in the connected system. No more risk of disease or contamination. Now, I wouldn't exactly advise using this as an excuse to start grabbing water directly beneath your sewage outlet pipes, but it does remove a lot of the logistical considerations around pollution and waste disposal. That just leaves Hygiene Bionics. It's a bit of an odd final project. You're going to need fabrication and prosthetics for this research too, making it the most advanced technologically. Everything else is industrial and this is spacer tech. The bionic bladder does about what you would expect from it. It reduces the need decay of both bladder and thirst. It says it only comes with one downside, which is the user becomes gassy, but provided they're releasing their air biscuits with comedic timing, it's not that big of an issue. These are crafted at the fabrication bench for 10 plasteel and 3 advanced components, which is a pretty big ask when a whole ass bionic arm only takes 15 plasteel and 4 advanced components. I know what I'd be building as a priority. The hygiene enhancer follows a very similar path. 10 plasteel, 3 advanced components, and it slows the loss of hygiene by 50%. These fall almost exclusively into the hilariously over-engineered super colonist kind of implant, where you have so many things plugged into someone that their health tab looks more like a crafting menu at your fabrication bench. Of course, if you happen to get your hands on these from something like a quest reward, or if a guest or a raider happens to have one that you can borrow, they're great little additions for body modders in your colony, as they don't push colonist value up too excessively, but do still grant them a great mood buff.
We can rebuild it. We have the technology. But I don't want to spend a lot of money.
And that's about it for dubs. You'll get a few more things like doctors needing to take care of the needs for their patient, giving them sponge baths or emptying bedpans, but there isn't really that much more to it. It's a tricky mod to try and place in terms of difficulty, because it is quite involved in its mechanics. A lot of the things you're using and building exist almost entirely to make the game harder for you as a player by giving you more needs to manage and more things to sink your resources into, while providing nothing outside of a few minor mood buffs to offset the investment. So it definitely doesn't fall under player power. If anything, this helps balance the game back out in the AI's favour, by making you push your wealth up and building waterworks and air conditioning, whilst pulling valuable time away from building defences, guns or armour. But at the same time, does that make Rimworld more difficult? No, not really. Much in the same way that a lot of modern survival games opt to use the holy trinity of needs, food, water and sleep, you can do more, and there are games that choose to. But as long as you know the steps you need to follow to get all of those needs covered, it only seems overwhelming at first glance. Rimworld went with a holy trinity of food, sleep and recreation, whilst things like beauty and comfort are secondary, more minor needs. Using dubs is adding 2 minor needs and 1 major need if you enable it in the mod settings. And fortunately for you, your colonists are automating pooping, washing and drinking tasks, so all you really need to do as a bare minimum is set up a primitive well, water tub and a latrine at the start of the game. That's it. It's really not that much more difficult than making sure you're throwing a horseshoes pin, table and beds down. You don't need to set up all of the plumbing infrastructure right away if you want to take your time shoring up your military might instead. How you go about approaching dubs bad hygiene goes a long way in determining if it's going to make your game harder or simply more rewarding over time, by allowing you to build exceptionally detailed and interesting colonies as the years go on. But just like any other mechanic in the game, if you hyper focus on it and overinvest into it at the cost of everything else, like I'm sure many of us did with Death Rest, Xenogenetics or Biosculpting the first time we played with it, it likely leads to disaster. Slow and steady wins the race with dubs. As long as you don't panic about not having everything set up right away, it's honestly super manageable and really pretty to boot. If you'd like to see the current suggestion list for mod rundowns, it's available to view on my Patreon page. All the posts are totally free to read and it's pinned at the very top. You can support me in producing content like this from just £1 a month. Gets your name in the credits and it helps me to stay alive. Thanks for watching folks. If you have any mods you'd like to see a full breakdown for, or suggestions of mods you would like to see covered that isn't Dead Man's Switch, feel free to leave them in the comments, I might get around to them. I'll be back again soon with another Rimworld mod rundown. Wherever you are in the world, enjoy the rest of your morning, afternoon or evening. Take care.